Have you ever made a promise so quietly, so deeply, that you didn't need to say it out loud, because the other person already knew? Some bonds don't need words. They're formed in silence, over coffee that was too bitter, or a night too cold to sleep. And when those bonds are tested, when no one's watching, what would you do? The jungle didn't speak. It never does. It was wet, thick, and heavy with the kind of silence that hums in your bones. Somewhere in that silence, two soldiers had stopped moving. One lay still, broken by the war long before the bullet ever touched him. The other, he just knelt there beside him. Eli didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't curse the sky like in those war movies where pain has to be loud to be real. He just stared at his friend. At the boots still muddy from yesterday. At the fingers that no longer twitched. He took off his helmet. The rain tapped softly against his buzz-cut hair, and he leaned forward until his forehead touched the ground next to Mick's shoulder. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not here. Not when they were only a day from getting pulled out. For a moment, he almost did what most would do. Radio it in. Mark the body. Move on. That was what the handbook said. That was the rule. But Eli didn't stand up. He didn't leave. Instead, his hand reached over, gently, and brushed the dirt off Mick's tag. He whispered something no one else would hear. Something about not letting him be alone out here. Not after everything. Then he pulled the strap of his rucksack tighter, leaned down, and began the slow, painful work of lifting his friend's body onto his back. No witnesses. No music swelling in the background. Just the sound of one man's breath and a promise too quiet for the world to notice. But he noticed. And for Eli, that was enough to take the first step. Eli didn't know how long he'd been walking. The jungle didn't give you hours. It gave you obstacles. Roots that reached like hands. Slopes that punished every step. Heat that settled in your bones and stayed there. Mick's body grew heavier with each mile. Not just the weight of limbs and gear, but the weight of what it meant. Every shift of Eli's shoulders reminded him, this was his friend. This was his burden now. No one had asked him to do it. And yet, when a branch tore across his cheek, when his knees buckled going uphill, when he nearly slipped into a ravine, Eli didn't stop. He'd pause, breathe, readjust, and keep moving. You'd do the same for me, wouldn't you? He mumbled once, as he braced his back against a rock to rest. His voice was hoarse. Not from emotion, but from lack of water. Still, he didn't cry. He didn't talk to the sky. He didn't curse anyone. Because this wasn't about pain. It was about presence. It was about not letting Mick be alone out here, in a place that didn't care who you were. Just trees. Just time. Just memory, and how quickly it fades when no one fights to carry it. So Eli carried it. Because leaving wasn't an option. Not for him. Not today. The rain hadn't let up. It slid down Eli's face, soaked through his uniform, and made each step feel like wading through wet cement. The jungle pressed in tighter now, dense, damp, and indifferent. The kind of place that swallows sound, memory, and men, if you let it. Eli shifted Mick's body again, arms aching from the strain. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. But in that quiet, thoughts had a way of speaking louder than words. He remembered the way Mick used to whistle when they marched. Off-key. Always the same 3 notes. It used to drive him crazy. Now, he missed it. He missed the noise. The distraction. Anything but this silence. A low branch caught Eli across the shoulder, nearly toppling him. He stumbled, caught himself with one hand in the mud, and sat there for a moment, breathing hard. I can't do this, he muttered. Not to Mick. Not to anyone. Just to the trees. But he didn't drop the body. He didn't curse the sky. He just sat there in the mud, hands trembling, breath shallow. A few feet away, a pair of ants crawled over Mick's boot. Tiny, alive, unaware. Eli looked at them. Then at the worn patch of cloth on Mick's sleeve, the part with the unit patch barely holding on. They'd talked once, briefly, about death. It was after a skirmish, when both had made it through by some miracle. Mick had said, "If I go down out here, don't let me rot in this place. Don't let me be just a pile of bones someone stumbles on in a few years." Eli hadn't answered back then. He didn't need to. He was answering now. He wiped the rain from his brow, pushed up with shaking legs, and readjusted Mick's weight across his back. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't dignified. But it was what he had to do. As he rose, a squelch of mud echoed underfoot. The rain kept falling. Time kept moving. But Eli had made his choice. Every footstep from here on wasn't just about reaching somewhere. It was about keeping a promise. One made in dirt and rain. One only he and Mick would ever understand. Eli didn't count the hours. He counted trees, hills, breathless climbs and muddy descents. Each moment passed without anyone to see it, no witness, no compass, no map. Just instinct and the soft, constant weight of his friend on his back. The first night came without warning. The jungle grew darker by the minute, swallowing light faster than he could react. He found a slope less steep than the others and lowered Mick down as gently as he could. Then he sat beside him, back against a tree, too tired to think. He chewed a corner of an old ration pack, not because he was hungry, but because it gave his jaw something to do besides clenching in pain. "You remember that night we got lost near base?" he whispered. "You said you'd never trust me with directions again." His voice cracked. "Should have listened." Mick didn't answer, of course. Just the shape of him, still and quiet under Eli's poncho. Rain came again in the early morning. Cold. Sharp. He woke to it soaking through his clothes, his boots already flooded. The mud clung to everything. It made standing feel like lifting bricks with your ankles. But Eli stood anyway. He adjusted the body, tightened the straps, and began again. Day 2 brought heat, thick and choking. The sun broke through, but not in any comforting way. It steamed the ground. Flies came, buzzing close to Mick's face. Eli waved them off with the edge of his shirt. There was a point, sometime that afternoon, when Eli slipped. His boot caught a rock hidden under the underbrush. He fell hard, his knee hitting sharp against something buried. Mick's body rolled off his back and hit the ground with a dull thud. For a long moment, Eli just lay there. Face in the leaves. Cheek pressed to damp soil. Maybe this was it. Maybe he'd gone as far as he could. But something about the silence didn't let him stop. Not pride. Not honor. Just the quiet. He sat up slowly, brushing mud from his face. Looked at Mick. Then pulled himself up, dragging his leg behind him. He reached down and pulled Mick back across his shoulders with a grunt. "Not yet," he breathed. "Not here." On the third day, the jungle began to thin. Not by much, but enough that Eli could feel it. The ground rose, drier under his feet. In the distance, he heard a bird call he recognized, one he hadn't heard in days. That sound felt like a sliver of hope. But hope didn't mean ease. Every muscle in Eli's back screamed. His hands had gone numb long ago. The straps cut deeper with every hour. He was running on grit, on will, and something harder to name. Late that afternoon, he crested a small ridge and saw the faintest line in the trees. A path. A worn path. He stopped, knees trembling. For the first time in 3 days, he let himself breathe, really breathe. The kind of breath you only take when you know you might actually make it. He looked over his shoulder, trying to shift the weight gently. "We're close, Mick," he said, his voice soft, hoarse. "Almost home." Then, with nothing but the trees around to listen, Eli took another step. And then another. 3 days. No witness. No applause. Just a man who refused to let go. The outpost wasn't much, just a few tents, a rusted radio tower, and a dirt path flattened by boots. The sun was starting to dip when a soldier on watch looked up and froze. There, walking out of the tree line, came a figure so covered in mud and sweat that, at first, the guard couldn't tell if he was even alive. The man moved slowly, each step deliberate. Bent forward slightly under a heavy weight. It wasn't until Eli reached the edge of the clearing that anyone understood what they were looking at. A few soldiers dropped what they were doing. A medic jogged over and then stopped dead in his tracks. The murmurs started quickly, hushed and uncertain. "He's carrying someone. No way he brought a body all the way from inside. Who is that guy?" Eli didn't respond. He didn't even lift his head. He just kept walking until his knees finally buckled and he dropped to one side, letting Mick's body slide gently to the ground. "I need water," he whispered. "But check him first." They surrounded him cautiously, two medics kneeling by Mick, one radioing in, a lieutenant staring like he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. "He's been gone for days," someone said quietly. "He brought him back," another replied. "All the way through the jungle." Eli sat in the dirt, back against a supply crate. He didn't look heroic. He didn't look proud. He looked empty. Like a man who had poured everything he had into those 3 days and had nothing left to give. One of the medics turned to him. "You carried him the whole way?" Eli nodded once. Didn't want him to be alone. No one had anything to say to that. Later, after Mick's body was placed under a tarp and the sun had dipped below the trees, a senior officer approached Eli. He had a clipboard in hand, but he didn't ask for a report. Instead, he said, "Why didn't you just mark the location and come back?" Eli didn't move. "Because he would have done the same for me." The officer paused, then nodded slowly. "Well, you did something most wouldn't even try." "I didn't do it to be seen," Eli said. "I just did it. And that was all. There was no medal. No headline. No speech in front of the company. But the story spread. Quietly. Word of mouth. From tent to tent. Man to man. Not in celebration, but in something deeper. A kind of reverence. Because in a place where life was cheap and names were often forgotten, someone had done something worth remembering. Not loudly. Not for glory. Just because it was right. The ceremony was simple. Just a few rows of folding chairs, a flagpole, and a chaplain who spoke with a steady voice. No cameras. No generals. Just the unit, standing in the sun with their hands behind their backs, eyes forward. Mick's casket sat under a canopy draped in the American flag. The same one he'd kept folded in his locker since deployment. Now it covered him, tight, clean, precise. Eli stood near the back. His uniform was still stained at the cuffs. He'd washed it twice, but some things just didn't come out. He didn't speak to anyone. Just stood still, hands clasped in front of him, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to be there. The chaplain finished his words. Someone played taps, soft and slow, the notes hanging in the air longer than they should have. And then, 2 soldiers stepped forward, folding the flag with practiced, quiet hands. Triangular, tight corners. A ritual older than both of them. One of them turned, carrying the folded flag toward the front row, toward Mick's mother. She was a small woman, maybe late 50s, with deep lines around her mouth and a steadiness in her posture that Eli couldn't stop staring at. She took the flag with both hands, nodded in silence. And then, something unexpected happened. She turned. Not toward the chaplain. Not toward the officer standing off to the side. She turned to Eli. "You carried my boy," she said. "You brought him home." Eli didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth, but no words came. She stepped forward, still holding the flag, and reached out. Pressed it into his hands. "You kept your promise. Now let me keep mine," she whispered. Eli froze. His fingers barely closed around the cloth. "This belongs with you," she said. He'd want it that way. He looked down at the folded triangle, the stars pressed tightly against the fabric. It felt heavier than he expected. Not in weight, but in meaning. "I'm not sure I deserve this," he said softly. The woman smiled gently. "It's not about deserving. It's about remembering." Then she walked back to her chair, leaving Eli standing there with the flag in his hands. He didn't cry. But his eyes stayed on that folded triangle the rest of the afternoon. Even as the chairs were cleared, even as the sun began to dip, he stood there, still, quiet, holding something that once draped over a man he couldn't leave behind. Not in life. Not in death. Eli didn't go back to the field. Not after that. He finished his time, packed his gear, and quietly stepped out of the uniform he'd worn for years. No speeches. No send-off. Just a plane ride home and the echo of things he couldn't say out loud. He settled in a small town in northern Oregon. A place with quiet streets and mornings that smelled like pine. He took a job at a local hardware store, simple work, predictable. The kind that didn't demand too much talking. Most people knew him as the quiet guy who always showed up early and never took long breaks. He wasn't unfriendly. Just reserved. Like someone who had lived a little too close to something that didn't leave you whole. At home, there was a shelf in the hallway. Nothing fancy. Just an old wood plank mounted to the wall. On it sat one thing, the folded flag. Still tight, still perfect. Eli dusted it once a week, never moved it. He didn't bring it up in conversation. He didn't need to. But every year, on the same day in late August, he drove out to a cemetery just past the edge of town. Section 12, Row C, Mick's grave. He didn't bring flowers. Never felt right about that. Instead, he'd take a quarter from his pocket, always a quarter, and place it gently on top of the headstone. Then he'd sit beside it, elbows on knees, and talk. Not long speeches. Just bits and pieces. "You wouldn't believe how expensive nails are now," he once said, shaking his head. "You'd have had a field day arguing with the cashier." Or, "That kid from the gas station finally asked me where I served. Took him 3 years." Or sometimes nothing at all. Just the sound of the wind and a presence that never quite left. One time, a boy, maybe 11, walked past with his grandfather and stopped. "Did you know him?" the boy asked. Eli looked at the name etched in stone, then nodded. "Yeah. He saved my life. And I brought him home." The boy didn't say anything else. Just looked at the grave a little longer than most would, then followed his grandfather down the path. Eli watched them go. Some stories don't need retelling. Not the whole thing. Just enough to carry something forward. A lesson. A bond. A moment that mattered. And so Eli kept showing up. Year after year. Because some friendships don't end with a burial. Some promises don't fade with time. What carries on isn't just memory. It's choice. It's loyalty. It's the quiet way one man honors another long after the war has gone silent. Eli aged quietly. He never sought attention. Never joined parades or stood on stages. He just lived, one ordinary day at a time. He fixed porch steps for neighbors who didn't ask. Shoveled sidewalks before sunrise. Sat on his front stoop every evening with a thermos of black coffee, watching the sky turn the color of worn denim. Sometimes, a local kid would stop by after school. Ask questions. Not about war, not directly. More like, did you ever lose someone you couldn't forget? Or, how do you know if you did the right thing? Eli never answered quickly. He'd stare at the horizon, sip his coffee, and say something like, "You don't always know. You just carry it the best way you can." They never stayed long. But they always came back. One day, a young veteran moved into town. You could tell by the way he scanned rooms without thinking, or how he didn't sit with his back to the door. He didn't talk much either, until he met Eli. Eli didn't offer advice. He didn't tell stories. But he invited the man over for coffee one morning, handed him a cup, and said, "You don't have to explain anything." That was enough. Word of Eli spread over time. Not in headlines, not on plaques. But in the quiet acknowledgments passed from one person to the next. "He's the one who carried his buddy out." That's Eli Carson. He doesn't talk much, but he showed up. There was a weight to that phrase. He showed up. Not once. Not just in the jungle. But over and over again, in 100 small ways that no one saw unless they were paying close attention. And when Eli passed, peacefully, one autumn morning, he left behind no grand eulogy. Just a weathered house, a folded flag in the hallway, and a cemetery visit that now came with 2 quarters placed side by side. The town didn't hold a parade. But someone planted a tree outside the hardware store. No sign. No inscription. Just a tree. And every Memorial Day, someone, not always the same person, hung a single dog tag from one of its branches. It swayed gently in the breeze, catching the morning light. Some people walked past without noticing. But the ones who knew, they stopped. Because sometimes, the kindest, bravest, most loyal souls aren't the ones who speak the loudest, but the ones who carry the heaviest things, and never ask to be seen. Eli Carson was that kind of man. The quiet kind of hero. Eli Carson's story reminds us that true heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a quiet decision made when no one's watching. He didn't carry Mick's body for recognition. He did it because a promise mattered. Because friendship, loyalty, and dignity aren't defined by medals, but by the choices we make when it would be easier to walk away. Eli didn't just bring a fallen comrade home, he carried the memory, the weight, and the meaning of that bond for the rest of his life. And in doing so, he showed us that the most powerful legacy is not in words, but in actions. In a world that often forgets the quiet ones, Eli stood for something we should never lose: the courage to do what's right, even when it's unseen. What would you carry for someone you love? And when the moment comes, will you walk away, or show up? If Eli's story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Legacy of Courage Stories. Every click helps us honor the quiet heroes whose stories deserve to be remembered, one step, one promise, one voice at a time.